from the earliest flickering shadows of human curiosity. Long before kings raised empires or priests whispered prayers to stone gods, there existed a strange and subtle bond between mankind and the green, fragrant plant that would one day be called cannabis. Picture a prehistoric campfire under a sky littered with stars, where ancient hunters warmed their hands and traded stories. And in the middle of it all, some curious soul tossed dried herbs into the flames, watching as the smoke spiraled upward, sweet and pungent, curling around their senses with a peculiar calm. That, perhaps, was the first accidental inhalation. The first time a human realized that the smoke from a certain leaf did something that made the world soften at its edges and thoughts drift like clouds. Archaeologists, tracing back the human use of psychoactive plants, have uncovered astonishing clues. Fragments of burnt cannabis seeds in ancient braziers found high in the Pamir Mountains of western China, dating to around 500 BCE, suggesting that even before the written word, people already knew this plant could transport their minds to distant places. But the relationship might go back even further, to prehistoric shamans who believed smoke carried prayers to the gods, who thought every puff was a bridge between earth and spirit. In Neolithic China, cannabis grew wild across the river valleys, its fibrous stalks used for rope, its seeds pressed for oil, and its leaves sometimes burned in ritual. Over time, people learned that not all smoke was equalsome, made you cough, others made you dream. Ancient farmers might have noticed that when they burned cannabis in their huts, they laughed a little easier, felt their aches fade, and their sleep deepen. Slowly, the plant gained a dual identity, practical for weaving and mystical for seeing. By the time civilization blossomed along the Yellow River, cannabis had already become part of daily life, and yet it remained half-hidden behind the curtain of superstition. Early Chinese texts from around 2700 BCE attributed to Emperor Shen Nung, the legendary father of medicine, the hemp plant as a remedy for pain, malaria, and absent-mindedness, but also warned that excessive use could make one see ghosts. This fascinating contradiction reveals much about early human attitudes toward altered consciousness, awe and fear intermingled, respect wrapped in curiosity. The idea that the mind could be shifted, twisted, expanded by a natural force was both sacred and dangerous. Meanwhile, far away on the steppes of Central Asia, nomadic tribes the Scythians rode horses across endless grasslands, carrying with them not only weapons and treasures, but also small bags of cannabis. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote around 440 BCE that these fierce warriors would sit together in tents, throwing hemp seeds on red-hot stones, filling the air with thick vapor, and howling with pleasure. Whether they were cleansing their spirits, celebrating victories, or simply enjoying the intoxicating release from harsh life on the steppe. One thing is certain: the act of inhaling cannabis smoke had already become a communal ritual, a link between body and spirit, between exhaustion and ecstasy. These scenes from the distant past are hauntingly familiar, echoes of modern gatherings where people share the same plant under the same stars. What's remarkable is not just that ancient people smoked cannabis, it's that they understood its essence deeply. They didn't isolate compounds, measure THC levels. They saw it as part of nature's language, The Scythians believed the smoke connected them with their ancestors. Early Indians saw it as the breath of Shiva, the divine destroyer and creator. The Chinese saw it as yin to humanity's yang, a subtle balance between the seen and unseen. In these early ages, smoking weed was not rebellion. It wasn't counterculture, it was culture itself. Archaeological finds in Israel, in the ancient temple of Tel Arad, revealed traces of cannabis resin mixed with animal dung on an altar, dating back to the 8th century BCE. Evidence that Hebrew priests burned it as incense in worship of Yahweh. In ancient Siberia, mummified remains of nobles were found buried with pouches of cannabis, their eyes closed in peaceful expressions, as if dreaming beyond death. Everywhere humans went, the plant followed, sprouting along trade routes, thriving where the soil was kind, adapting to climate and culture alike. Perhaps that's why cannabis feels ancient, because it evolved with us, not as a domesticated slave of agriculture, but as a companion of consciousness. Imagine an early evening thousands of years ago in a small settlement beside a river. The air hums with the sound of insects, and a group of villagers gather to burn herbs in a stone bowl. The smoke rises, fragrant and thick. Someone breathes deeply and feels their thoughts slow, their heartbeats steady. They begin to hum softly, and soon the group joins in a low, rhythmic chant, blending with the crackle of the fire. No one knows exactly what's happening in their minds, but they know it feels right, ancient, necessary. The night deepens. Stars shimmer. The plant, once a weed among weeds, becomes a doorway. In that moment, the first chapter of humanity's relationship with weed begins not with rebellion or recreation, but with reverence and ritual. And though millennia will pass, empires will rise and fall, kings will outlaw and rediscover it, the memory of that smoky night will linger in our collective soul. For this was the dawn of a partnership that transcended medicine and intoxication. It was the first whisper of an idea that consciousness could expand, that the ordinary could touch the divine, and that somewhere between the inhale and the exhale, humans could find something resembling peace. As the centuries drifted onward, the humble green plant that once smoldered quietly in the fires of ancient nomads began to weave itself into the deeper fabric of human civilization, transforming from sacred incense to daily companion. By the dawn of the ancient worlds, great empires Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and beyond cannabis had traveled far, its seeds tucked away in caravans, its fibers woven into rope and cloth, its scent mingling with incense in temples where priests prayed to gods of fertility and storm. The Sumerians may not have recorded cannabis directly by name, but their neighbors certainly did. The Assyrians called it kubu, a word hauntingly close to our modern cannabis, and they burned it as a sacred offering to the gods, believing its smoke carried divine messages skyward. Imagine the streets of Babylon around 1000 BCE, lined with clay brick homes, and markets overflowing with spices, oils, and resins. Somewhere in a shadowed corner, a merchant carefully unwraps a bundle of dried green leaves, selling it to a priest who intends to use it in a temple ceremony. The priest will grind the herb, mix it with other fragrant plants, and set it aflame before an idol. Watching the smoke twist and rise as chants echo through the cool stone hall. To them, this was not indulgence, it was communication with the divine. The plant's power to alter perception was seen as proof of its supernatural origin. But as much as it was revered in ritual, cannabis was also creeping into daily life in quiet ways. In ancient Egypt, papyri from around 1500 BCE record mixtures of hemp used to ease pain and inflammation. Egyptian women reportedly applied hemp-infused oils for relief. In the dry, golden light of a Theban afternoon, an apothecary might crush the seeds, mix them with honey and beer, and administer them to a patient complaining of fever or sorrow. Pharaohs themselves were not above its use, though they cloaked it in secrecy. The plant was considered a gift from the god Ra, a helper for the weary, a balm for the restless. Picture a royal chamber scented with myrrh and incense, where a young scribe carefully records recipes for the plant of joy. Outside, the Nile glitters beneath the sun, oblivious to the fact that one of humanity's most enduring habits is already taking root in the land of pyramids. Meanwhile, across the Indus River Valley, Indian mystics were turning cannabis into a cornerstone of spiritual practice. The Vedas, ancient Sanskrit scriptures dating as far back as 2000 BC, describe bang, a drink made from ground cannabis leaves, milk, and spices, declaring it one of the 5 sacred plants and calling it a source of happiness and liberation. To sip bang was to taste divine freedom. It was said to bring you closer to Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation. Picture an old yogi seated by the Ganges, his body smeared with ash, his eyes half closed in meditation. As the evening bells ring, he drinks from a small clay cup, his breath slowing, his thoughts dissolving into the endless hum of existence. For him, this plant was no mere drug, it was the breath of God. Over time, cannabis would find its way into every corner of Indian life: festival drinks, medicines, and prayers. During the festival of Holi, people still drink bang to this day, laughing in colors and forgetting worldly pain. Farther west, Greek and Roman writers began to notice the plant. Herodotus had already described the Scythians' strange smoking rituals, but by the time of the Roman Empire, hemp was prized mostly for its fiber. Roman soldiers used hemp ropes to rig ships, farmers used it for nets, and physicians like Dioscorides prescribed its seeds to ease earaches and swelling. But while Rome was practical, its neighbors in the east were mystical. The Persians and early Arabs saw cannabis as both medicine and muse. In ancient Persia, Zoroastrian priests believed the plant could purify the soul. They called it the good narcotic. Later, in Islamic cultures, despite religious restrictions against intoxication, hashish, the concentrated resin of cannabis, would become a quiet form of spiritual escape, spreading through the Middle East like whispered poetry. But that's a story for another time. For now, imagine how this plant was quietly reshaping human experience without fanfare or rebellion. It crossed deserts and seas, slipped into temples and kitchens, treating pain, easing sorrow, enhancing worship, and occasionally simply helping people laugh at the absurdity of life. Through all of this, no one called it a vice. There were no laws, no stigmas, no prohibition. It was simply part of existence, as natural as wine, as ordinary as smoke. Ancient people didn't think in terms of highs or addiction. They thought in terms of harmony. Cannabis was not an escape from reality, was a way to touch it more deeply, to listen to the quiet hum of being alive. Imagine the irony that thousands of years later, the same plant that connected humans to the divine would be outlawed by kings and presidents, its users shamed or jailed, its potential buried under centuries of misunderstanding. But in these ancient times, it was free, and so were the people who used it. As night fell over the ancient world, the smoke of countless fires rose into the heavens from China to India to Egypt to Persia, and somewhere in that drifting haze, the seeds of a global tradition were being planted, one that would survive wars, empires, and dogmas, carried forward not by power or policy, but by memory, ritual, and human longing. By the time the first millennium before Christ drew to a close, cannabis had already traveled farther than most ancient traders ever dreamed, its roots stretching across Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, embedding itself in the everyday rituals and hidden corners of countless civilizations. Yet, in this wide journey, its story remained strangely quiet, a whisper rather than a proclamation, a presence that shaped human life not through conquest or decree, but through calm persistence. Picture, if you can, the old Silk Road winding its way through deserts and mountains, carrying not only silk and spices, but also the faint scent of burning herbs that clung to the robes of travelers. Caravans stopped at dusty oases where merchants traded stories, seeds, and dreams. And in the glow of campfires, the fragrant smoke of hemp mixed with that of cedarwood and myrrh. It was there, between East and West, that cannabis became a global traveler. From China, it moved west with nomads and monks. From India, it drifted north with traders and mystics. From Persia, it journeyed toward the Mediterranean, carried by those who sought comfort from the body's pains and the soul's burdens. By around 500 BCE, it had become part of the world's great conversations, not just in medicine, but in philosophy and spirituality too. In India, Buddhist monks saw cannabis as a tool for contemplation, a plant that could quiet the body and open the mind. Some early sects used it in small doses before meditation, believing it helped dissolve the barriers between self and cosmos. Across the Himalayas in ancient Tibet, certain tantric practitioners burned cannabis resin during ceremonies designed to merge the human spirit with the divine. To them, the drifting smoke symbolized the fleeting nature of thought, the way consciousness rises and fades. And far to the west, in the sun-drenched lands of the Mediterranean, Greeks and Thracians began to hear tales of the smoke of Scythia, the strange ritual of the northern horsemen who laughed and shouted inside their tents. It fascinated and unsettled them, this idea of intoxication through air rather than liquid. The Greeks had their wine, the Egyptians their beer, but this was foreign and mysterious. A few curious souls experimented. Physicians like Galen and Dioscorides noted the plant's properties, but the Greeks never fully embraced it as the Easterners did. Still, the knowledge spread, and by the time the Roman Empire rose to power, hemp was everywhere, woven into sails that caught the wind of the Mediterranean, twisted into ropes that bound the empire's ships, spun into cloth for soldiers and peasants alike. Yet even amid its practical use, its other nature lingered like a secret. Soldiers stationed in the far provinces may have burned hemp at night, seeking a moment of calm after battle, inhaling softly, remembering home. In the quiet darkness of Roman camps, the smell of burning rope might have mixed with laughter and the faint murmur of foreign tongues. Meanwhile, in China, the ancient Taoists had begun to use cannabis in their spiritual practices, mixing it with ginseng and other herbs to create elixirs that they believed could grant visions or even immortality. Taoism taught that harmony with nature was the key to transcendence, and cannabis, growing wild, unassuming, resilient, was seen as a plant that embodied the Tao itself. Its ability to alter consciousness was not seen as trickery, but as revelation. To a Taoist sage meditating in a mountain cave, the drifting smoke was a path to stillness, a way to step beyond the chattering of the world and glimpse the eternal flow beneath all things. Centuries passed like the slow turning of a wheel, and cannabis remained faithful to humanity, sometimes worshipped, sometimes ignored, but never lost. It grew quietly in the corners of temples, along riverbanks, beside homes and roads, waiting to be rediscovered again and again. There's a strange comfort in knowing that across thousands of years and thousands of miles, humans kept returning to the same plant for the same reasons: relief, reflection, connection. It didn't matter whether they called it ma, kubu bang, or hemp. It mattered only that they recognized its song. Somewhere deep in our species' collective memory, we seem to have always known that smoke could carry us beyond ourselves, that within the breath of the earth there was a doorway to something gentler. And so, as the classical world faded and the Middle Ages began to stir on the horizon, the stage was set for cannabis to take on new forms, to slip through new cultures, to become the quiet rebel that it was always meant to be. But in these early times, in this golden age of temples and trade routes, it was still innocent, still holy, still simple. It was the companion of mystics, the comfort of healers, and the secret solace of weary travelers staring into the night sky, their minds soft and still, listening to the same stars that had once watched over the first fires of prehistory. The story of humanity and weed was no longer just about curiosity. It was about continuity, about the strange endurance of a bond that neither time nor empire could erase. As the ancient world crumbled and new faiths began to rise from its ruins, cannabis survived like a stubborn green ghost, drifting through centuries of transformation, war, and worship, adapting itself to each new belief and border that mankind created. The classical empires of Greece and Rome had faded, and the light of their knowledge dimmed under the weight of collapse. But the plant endured, carried by nomads and monks, sailors and slaves, tucked away in the folds of trade routes that stretched from China to Africa. In the East, where civilizations like India and Persia flourished, cannabis continued to thrive as both medicine and sacrament. But in the West, its mystical properties retreated into whispers. Around the 7th century, a new power rose in the deserts of Arabia: Islam. The Quran forbade, especially wine, yet human curiosity, ever restless, found ways to interpret, to question, to bend. By the 9th century, in the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, scholars and mystics began to rediscover cannabis in a new light, not as a forbidden pleasure, but as a key to contemplation. Hashish, the potent resin extracted from the plant's flowers, emerged in the streets and palaces of Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus, transforming from a local curiosity into a cultural phenomenon. Imagine the bustling alleys of Baghdad in the year 900, filled with the scent of spices, ink, and smoke. Poets gather in hidden courtyards, their laughter soft under the stars, as they pass around small clay pipes and speak in riddles about divine love and the illusion of the self. These were the Sufis, the mystics of Islam, who sought union with God not through doctrine but through experience, through the breaking of boundaries. For them, cannabis was not rebellion, it was revelation. The smoke that filled their lungs was a metaphor for divine intoxication, for the way the spirit could dissolve into the presence of the eternal. One Sufi poet wrote that the plant opened the hidden eye, allowing the heart to see what the mind could not. Of course, not everyone approved. Religious scholars debated fiercely, calling it the friend of the lazy, accusing users of idleness and heresy. But the plant, indifferent to judgment, kept growing. From the gardens of Persia to the fields of Egypt, from the mountain retreats of the Sufis to the crowded ports of the Mediterranean, hashish became both a solace and a scandal. The very name assassin is said to have come from Hashashin, a sect of Nezari Ismaili warriors who, according to legend, used hashish to enter trance-like states before battle. Whether true or not, the story spread like wildfire, painting cannabis as both mystical and dangerous, a duality that would haunt it for centuries. In truth, most users were not killers, but dreamers, poets, peasants, and wanderers seeking a moment of peace in a turbulent age. Meanwhile, far to the east, China's long relationship with cannabis continued quietly. Though the ancient spiritual uses waned, its medical importance grew. By the time of the Tang and Song dynasties, physicians prescribed hemp preparations for pain, constipation, and fever, describing it in detailed pharmacopoeia. The Chinese saw the plant as yin-cool, passive, nurturing, used to balance the body's fiery ailments. Across the Himalayas in India, the use of bhang persisted with unbroken devotion. Festivals, pilgrimages, and ceremonies carried the green drink's legacy through centuries of invasions and dynastic changes. During Shivaratri, devotees drank bhang to honor the god who, according to legend, rested beneath the cosmic tree of cannabis, wrapped in smoke and serenity. And as the Islamic empires expanded into India, they encountered this deep-rooted tradition and absorbed it into their own. Muslim poets in Mughal courts wrote verses about the laughter and insight found in cannabis, describing it as the leaf that lightens the heart. By the 13th century, the plant had crossed into Africa. Arab traders brought it across the Red Sea and the Sahara, and soon it took root in Ethiopia, Egypt, and Morocco. African shamans embraced it as a spiritual aid, blending it with local traditions of trance and healing. In the highlands of Ethiopia, elders burned it in sacred rituals, believing the smoke summoned ancestral spirits. In North Africa, Sufi orders like the Calendaria and Shadilia adopted hashish as a path to divine ecstasy, singing, dancing, and smoking until they lost themselves in the rhythm of devotion. It is strange and beautiful to think that while Europe slept through the so-called Dark Ages, half the world was still inhaling, still meditating, still exploring the vast chambers of the mind through this ancient plant, while monks in stone monasteries copied holy texts by candlelight somewhere across the desert. Another kind of monk was inhaling the same smoke that had once risen from Scythian tents, now framed in Arabic poetry and Sufi prayer. The thread of cannabis history, invisible but unbroken, wound its way through every faith, every philosophy, every geography, connecting them not through doctrine, but through experience. The plant didn't care who ruled or what creed prevailed. It simply grew quietly, persistently, waiting for those who sought something beyond the visible. It's almost poetic to realize that at the heart of every civilization, in every century, there existed someone sitting in silence, breathing deeply, eyes closed, letting the world fade away. That universal stillness, the moment between inhale and exhales, where cannabis lived, not as vice, not as crime, but as communion. By the time the 13th century turned its pages into the 14th, the world had changed again, and with it, the strange, smoky bond between humans and cannabis deepened in unexpected ways. The Mongol Empire had thundered across Asia, connecting lands that had never before shared trade or thought, creating what was perhaps the first truly global network of exchange in its wake. Not just silk and spices moved, but ideas, rituals, and plants. Cannabis, hardy and adaptable, flourished wherever it was carried. Along the Silk Road, merchants sold sacks of hemp for rope, resin for pleasure, and seeds for medicine. In Central Asia, hashish houses appeared in caravan towns, small, dimly lit shelters where travelers could rest, smoke, and listen to storytellers recite tales of love and loss. In Persia, poets like Rumi and Hafiz wove words that danced around the idea of intoxication, not of the body, but of the soul land. Many historians believe that cannabis inspired at least part of that spiritual language. It wasn't about escape, it was about transcendence. For the Sufis and seekers of the time, to be intoxicated was to be filled with the divine. The lines between wine, poetry, and smoke blurred in the golden haze of metaphor. Somewhere in the bustling streets of Shiraz or Set, a young mystic might have sat cross-legged in a corner, eyes half-lidded, whispering verses that likened the curling smoke of hashish to the breath of God. Meanwhile, in the great cities of Egypt, hashish had become a cultural force. Cairo's narrow alleys buzzed with its scent. Travelers and laborers smoked in cafes and gardens, laughing quietly beneath the palm trees. The ruling Mamluks tried to suppress it, declaring it a sin, but their efforts failed miserably. In 1378, Sultan Sudan Shukuni even ordered the destruction of all cannabis plants in Egypt and decreed that anyone caught consuming hashish would have their teeth pulled out. Yet, within months, the fields had been replanted and the laughter returned. The people's bond with the plant was simply too deep to erase. You can almost imagine the scene: soldiers burning hemp fields by day, while farmers secretly replant them by night. The desert wind carrying both the scent of smoke and the promise of rebellion. Hashish was no longer just a spiritual tool. It had become a symbol of defiance, a quiet protest against control. Across the Red Sea in Ethiopia, cannabis was finding another purpose. It became intertwined with traditional medicine and divination rituals, used by healers to treat illness and by spiritual leaders to open portals between the seen and unseen. African tribes developed unique smoking methods. In many ways, this period marks the birth of what we would later recognize as weed culture. Though it was deeply rooted in reverence and ritual, not recreation. Farther east, in India, Bhang remained sacred, surviving Islamic invasions, Mughal rule, and colonial curiosity. Yogis roamed from village to village, carrying small bundles of cannabis wrapped in cloth, their dreadlocked hair dusted with ash, their eyes glowing with calm. During the Mughal era, emperors like Akbar the Great tolerated its use, and some even celebrated it quietly in their gardens, sipping bhang while musicians played ragas under the stars. Cannabis had become a bridge plant that connected the devout and the hedonist, the king and the beggar, the East and the West. But while Asia and Africa basked in its green haze, Europe remained largely ignorant of its psychoactive side. Europeans grew hemp in vast quantities, yes, but only for rope, sails, and cloth. Ships that would later carry explorers to the New World were literally bound together by hemp fibers. Yet the sailors tying those ropes had no idea that the same plant could alter the mind. In monasteries, monks used hemp oil for lamps and parchment, its seeds for food. It was everywhere and yet unseen, a silent companion waiting for rediscovery. As the medieval world edged toward the Renaissance, the whispers of the East began to reach Europe's ears through travelers and scholars. Marco Polo, during his journeys, wrote about the Hashashin, describing their strange rituals. European alchemists began experimenting with Eastern medicines, and though cannabis remained on the fringes of curiosity, its time was coming. The world was slowly becoming smaller again. By the 1400s, as trade between Africa, Asia, and Europe intensified, cannabis began to trickle westward, not just as a fiber, but as a feeling. Ships leaving Alexandria and Tunis carried barrels of hashish bound for Mediterranean ports. In southern Spain, under Muslim rule, the plant had already taken root, flourishing in the gardens of Andalusia. The Moors who brought advanced science and architecture to Europe also carried with them the legacy of cannabis, though by then its smoke was confined mostly to private gatherings, hidden behind heavy curtains. When Christian kingdoms reconquered Spain, they inherited not only libraries and palaces, but also plants, among them the quiet survivor, cannabis. Its medicinal reputation persisted, even among priests and physicians. Medieval herbals described it as useful for pain, sleep, and melancholy. And though its intoxicating side remained largely unspoken, it lingered there, waiting beneath the ink. Through all this, the plant continued to do what it always had: adapt, survive, connect. The Mongols used it to treat wounds. The Sufis used it to meet God. The peasants of Egypt used it to laugh. And the scribes of Europe used it to make ink. Each culture saw in cannabis what it needed most. It was a healer to the sick, a muse to the poet, a rebel to the oppressed, a companion to the lonely. And as the medieval world gave way to the dawn of exploration, the winds of history began to shift once more. Soon, ships would set sail for new worlds, carrying not just gold and ambition, but the seeds of a plant that had already changed the old world forever. As the medieval night slowly faded into the dawn of the Renaissance, the world began to stretch and awaken. Its curiosity reignited after centuries of superstition and silence, and once again, the story of cannabis found itself drifting across oceans and minds alike. The age of exploration, that feverish century of sails, stars, and ambition, did not just trade in gold and gunpowder. It carried with it the quiet migration of plants that would reshape human history. And among them was the green traveler that had already walked beside humanity for millennia. European ships, vast wooden creatures straining under the wind, were rigged with hemp ropes and canvas sails, their decks smeared with hemp oil, their lamps burning hempseed light. Ironically, the very voyages that would carry Christianity, conquest, and colonization to distant lands were powered by the same plant that had once been sacred to shamans and sages. When Portuguese sailors rounded the coast of Africa, they found cannabis already thriving there, tended by local tribes who smoked it in long clay pipes or mixed it with herbs in communal rituals. They called it diamba, and to them it was a bridge between ancestors and living souls. The sailors took note, perhaps even joined in, though they left no records of their laughter. Soon, as trade routes expanded toward South America, seeds of hemp and cannabis traveled alongside sugarcane and slaves, crossing the Atlantic to take root in the fertile soils of the New World. By the 1500s, the plant had reached Brazil, brought by enslaved Africans who carried not just labor but culture, song, and smoke. There, it became a quiet comfort amid unbearable suffering, a secret solace whispered in the shadows of plantations. These were people torn from their homes, stripped of identity, and yet, through cannabis, they reclaimed small fragments of memory. The act of smoking, rhythmic and reflective, became a ritual of survival. On the other side of the Atlantic, in Europe, hemp's reputation remained industrious. Kings issued decrees demanding its cultivation. In England, Henry VIII even fined farmers who failed to grow it, for it was essential to naval power. Hemp was rope, sail, parchment, and strength. But its deeper nature, its ability to ease pain, to soften the mind's edges, remained mostly forgotten. That began to change when travelers returned from the East with strange tales of Indian hemp, a plant that could make one dream while awake. Physicians and explorers described its effects in letters that mingled fascination and fear. To the rational minds of Renaissance Europe, the idea that smoke could alter thought seemed both miraculous and dangerous. Yet, curiosity is a stubborn thing. By the 1600s, cannabis began appearing in European herbals, again as a mystical substance, but as a medicine. Doctors wrote of its power to calm nerves, relieve pain, and encourage sleep. Apothecaries sold tinctures and oils under Latin names, often without realizing that they were selling the same plant once burned in the temples of India and Persia. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in the colonies of North America, hemp fields stretched across Virginia and Massachusetts, planted under government order to supply rope for ships and cloth for trade. Farmers like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson would one day grow it on their estates, not for smoke, but for industry. Yet the plant's psychoactive cousin, Cannabis indica, was quietly making its way into the continent through trade with the Caribbean and Africa. In the Sugar Islands, enslaved workers smoked it in clay pipes, calling it ganja, a name that echoed the Sanskrit of their ancestors. Thus, in a circle spanning continents and centuries, the sacred herb of Shiva returned to a new world, reborn in exile. Back in the old world, the Ottoman Empire had become a haven for hashish culture. Cairo, Istanbul, and Damascus, cafes buzzed with conversation and smoke. Travelers from Europe who ventured into these cities described scenes of relaxed laughter and philosophical debate, of men lost in thought amid the curling haze of hashish dens. Some were horrified, others enchanted. French and British writers, priests and painters all recorded it in their journals, though most misunderstood it, viewing it through the lens of exoticism and otherness. They saw only indulgence, not insight. Yet beneath that judgment, the truth remained. Cannabis had become a quiet thread binding humanity across every creed and continent. Whether in the hands of African healers, Indian ascetics, Arab poets, or European sailors, it served the same purpose: to soften the edges of life, to ease the passage of time, to connect the seen with the unseen. And though it would soon meet centuries of persecution, for now it thrived freely, green and golden beneath the sun, spreading from soil to soul. It had crossed mountains and empires, survived crusades and conquests, and still it endured. There's something deeply human about that endurance, about the way this plant, so simple and silent, became a mirror to our own contradictions. It was both sacred and profane, praised and banned, healer and outcast. And yet it never stopped growing. Perhaps that is why, as the Renaissance blossomed into the modern age, cannabis remained quietly patient, like an old teacher waiting for humanity to listen again. The fires of empire and exploration may have changed the world's borders, but the smoke of this ancient plant still rose softly into the night sky, unchanged, eternal, whispering the same truth it had told the Scythian, the shamans, the Sufis, and the slaves, that within the breath of the earth lies the memory of peace. As the world stepped into the industrial age, the story of cannabis began to change once more, not because the plant itself transformed, but because humanity did. The dawn of machines, factories, and empires brought with it an obsession with order, science, and control. Everything had to be measured, categorized, and owned. The plant that had once wandered freely through deserts, jungles, and temples was now being dissected, studied, and legislated. In the 18th century, European doctors and explorers returned from Asia and Africa, carrying small boxes of dark, fragrant resin hashish and vials of thick tincture. They brought stories too, tales of Indian sadhis who smoked to reach divine ecstasy, of Egyptian scholars who debated philosophy in smoky cafes, of Persian poets who claimed that inspiration lived inside the plant's green soul. These stories fascinated and unsettled Europe's scholars. Medicine at the time was an art balanced between superstition and science, and cannabis offered something tantalizing, a natural substance that could calm the mind, ease pain, and spark dreamlike thoughts without the violence of alcohol or the bitterness of opium. Soon, doctors across England, France, and Germany began experimenting. In 1839, an Irish physician named William O'Shaughnessy, stationed in colonial India, published a paper that would change everything. He described the Indian use of cannabis in both spiritual and medical contexts, documenting its effectiveness for treating pain, spasms, and even insomnia. O'Shaughnessy's work spread rapidly across Europe and America, and soon cannabis tinctures became staples of pharmacies everywhere. They came in small amber bottles with neat handwritten labels: Extractum Cannabis Indicae. Housewives, soldiers, and scholars alike took a few drops in their tea to ease nerves or lull themselves to sleep. No one thought much of it. It was simply another gift of nature. In fact, the 19th century was perhaps cannabis's golden age in the Western world. Doctors praised its versatility. Writers romanticized it, and ordinary people, weary from the grind of industrial life, found in it a rare moment of stillness. But as with all things that bring pleasure or peace, suspicion was never far behind. The same colonial networks that carried cannabis to Europe also carried moral judgment back to the East. British administrators in India began to worry that the natives were too addicted to bhang, that the plant made them unproductive. The irony, of course, was that it was these same colonizers who had first encouraged its study and sale. In 1894, the British government launched the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, one of the most extensive drug studies ever conducted. After interviewing hundreds of users, farmers, and doctors, the commission concluded something astonishing. Cannabis was mostly harmless. It did not cause madness, crime, or addiction. Its moderate use was socially and medically acceptable. For a moment, truth seemed to triumph, but politics has little patience for nuance. As industrial capitalism deepened its roots, new interests arose: pharmaceutical companies, governments, and moral reformers seeking to control what people consumed and how they felt. Alcohol had tax revenue. Opium had medical infrastructure. Cannabis had neither. It grew freely in backyards and forests, outside the reach of profit. That made it dangerous not to public health, but to power. Around the same time, in North America, hemp was still a vital crop. Farmers grew it for rope, clothing, and paper. George Washington himself once wrote about sowing the hemp seed with care. Yet, by the early 1900s, a strange transformation was underway. Immigrants from Mexico, fleeing revolution, brought with them the custom of smoking cannabis recreationally. They called it marijuana. To them, it was a comfortable, cheap, peaceful way to rest after labor. But to the American press and politicians of the time, anything foreign was a threat. Newspapers began printing wild headlines about marijuana madness, linking the plant to crime and rebellion. It was the birth of propaganda, not truth. Stories of violence and insanity spread like wildfire, none based on fact, all built on prejudice. The plant that had healed for centuries was suddenly painted as evil, and so began the long shadow that would follow cannabis through the 20th century. Still, before the fear took full hold, there remained small circles of artists and intellectuals who saw in the plant something profound. In Paris, the Club des Hashishinza group of poets and painters that included Baudelaire, Dumas, and Gautier gathered to explore the visions it inspired. They described colors deepening, time slowing, thought expanding. Their words would later echo through generations of dreamers and musicians. Across the Atlantic, American jazz musicians and writers found similar solace in reefer, using it not to escape life, but to deepen their connection to rhythm, to syncopation, to the pulse of creativity itself. Cannabis had always been a mirror, reflecting back whatever humanity sought in it: escape or enlightenment, sin or serenity. The industrial age merely magnified that reflection. As factories darkened the skies and cities grew louder, the gentle whisper of this ancient plant became a quiet act of rebellion, a reminder that peace could still be found in breath, in green, in the earth itself. The world was changing fast, and not all could keep up. But somewhere, in a dimly lit room, a scholar dipped his pen in ink. A tired laborer rolled a small cigarette, and the same smoke that had curled through temples and deserts now drifted through modern air, carrying with it 5,000 years of human memory. The 20th century began like a long exhale after centuries of restless invention. But beneath that sigh of progress lay the first murmurs of fear that would soon reshape the fate of cannabis forever. What had once been a quiet companion to healers, poets, and farmers was about to become a target in a world obsessed with control. As the new century dawned, America was rising into its role as a global power, full of optimism, technology, and moral anxiety. Cities like New York, New Orleans, and Chicago were melting pots of cultures: Mexican, Caribbean, African American. With them came music, rhythm, and rituals that unsettled the Puritan hearts of those in charge. Jazz floated through smoky clubs, laughter echoed from bars, and somewhere in the haze, the scent of marijuana drifted soft, earthy, rebellious. For the musicians of that era, cannabis wasn't a menace. It was part of their creative pulse, an ally that softened time and opened sound. But to the political establishment, it became the perfect symbol of everything they feared: freedom, race, and uncontainable joy. In 1930, the U.S. government formed the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, led by a man named Harry Anslinger, name that would forever change the plant's story. Anslinger saw cannabis not as a plant, but as a weapon. For his crusade against what he called degeneracy, he flooded newspapers with tales of reefer madness, claiming that marijuana turned people violent and insane. His words were built on prejudice, not evidence, yet they spread faster than truth ever could. Behind his campaign lay a darker motive. By demonizing cannabis, he could expand his bureau's power and align himself with corporate interests, threatened by hemp's potential to replace wood pulp and synthetic fibers. The media joined the frenzy, painting cannabis as a foreign invader, corrupting white youth. Films like Reefer Madness turned lies into legend, and by 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act effectively made the plant illegal in the United States. It was a quiet war disguised as law battle, not just against a plant, but against the people who used it. African American jazz musicians, Mexican laborers, and immigrant communities bore the brunt of it. Their music, their customs, their peace were criminalized overnight. The smoke that had once risen from sacred altars now rose from the dark corners of alleys, hunted by law. Yet, as it has always done, cannabis survived. It went underground, carried in small paper rolls, tucked into pockets, whispered about in songs and coded phrases. The world moved into World War II, and ironically, hemp was once again celebrated not as a drug, but as a strategic crop. America launched the Hemp for Victory campaign, urging farmers to grow it for rope, uniforms, and parachutes. The contradiction was almost poetic. The same government that condemned cannabis for the soul now praised hemp for the nation. But after the war, the shadow returned. The 1950s brought conformity, fear of communism, and the myth of moral purity. To question authority, to experiment, or even to think freely became suspected yet. Beneath the surface, the next revolution was quietly growing. In smoky college dorms and beat cafes, poets and thinkers rediscovered the forgotten plant. Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and the counterculture writers found in cannabis a doorway to a different kind of consciousness, one unbound by the rigid machinery of modern life. They didn't see it as rebellion, but as awakening. And as the 1960s bloomed into full color, that awakening caught fire. Hippies, students, artists all turned to cannabis, not as an escape, but as an act of peace in a world tearing itself apart. While the Vietnam War raged and civil rights protests filled the streets, clouds of marijuana smoke became symbols of unity, love, and defiance. The old world, built on fear and control, felt the tremor of change. Scientists, too, began to revisit the plant with fresh curiosity. In 1964, Israeli chemist Raphael Mechoulam isolated THC, the compound responsible for cannabis's psychoactive effects. For the first time, science began to catch up to what shamans and healers had known for millennia. That within this humble plant lay a complex symphony of chemistry tied intimately to the human body's own endocannabinoid system. It wasn't witchcraft, it was biology. But despite the evidence, governments clung to propaganda. In 1970, the United States declared the war on drugs, classifying marijuana as a Schedule I substance, alongside heroin, claiming it had no accepted medical use. Prisons filled, lives were shattered, and entire communities, particularly black and brown ones, were targeted. Cannabis had once been a bridge between people. Now, it became a wall used to divide them. Yet history, like nature, always finds balance. The very generation criminalized for using it would go on to question everything about authority. Musicians like Bob Marley, inspired by Rastafarian faith, turned cannabis into a symbol of spiritual resistance. The herb, Marley said, is the healing of the nation. And though the system tried to silence that message, it echoed in music, art, and hearts across the globe. From Jamaica to San Francisco, Amsterdam to Kathmandu, people began to see through the smoke of lies and rediscover the ancient truth that this plant was never the enemy. The 20th century's war on cannabis was not a story of victory or defeat. It was a reflection of fear meeting freedom, control meeting consciousness. And like all old stories, it would fade eventually, replaced by something gentler, something more honest. But that part, the rebirth, was still waiting, quietly, like a seed beneath the soil, patient for the dawn. As the 1970s faded into the dusk of the 20th century, the story of cannabis entered one of its strangest chapters, an age of contradiction, where the world could no longer ignore the plant's presence, yet still refused to understand it. Across continents, a quiet, cultural, and scientific tug-of-war unfolded between suppression and rediscovery. The flower that had once been passed from hand to hand in temples, fields, and smoky cafes had now become the subject of courtrooms, laboratories, and protests. Governments tightened laws, yet curiosity bloomed stronger than ever. In the United States, the so-called war on drugs deepened through the 1980s, spreading like wildfire across television screens and classrooms. Posters warned children to just say no, while politicians declared cannabis the gateway to ruin. Helicopters hovered over fields in the South, burning crops that once belonged to poor farmers. Entire communities were surveilled, arrested, and caged for the same plant that had once been medicine, rope, and prayer. But as fear took the stage, truth continued to whisper backstage. Scientists, often working quietly in universities or abroad, kept studying the plant's chemistry and its interaction with the human body. They discovered something astonishing. Humans possess an endocannabinoid system, a network of receptors throughout the brain and organs that interact naturally with the compounds in cannabis. It was as if the plant and the body had evolved together, two old friends reconnecting after centuries apart. Yet such discoveries were buried beneath the noise of politics. The irony was hard to miss. While millions were punished for possessing a few grams of marijuana, pharmaceutical companies were synthesizing THC in laboratories, selling it legally as medicine under names like The double standard was as clear as it was cruel. But culture has its own rhythm, and by the late 1980s, the winds began to shift. The children of the counterculture had grown into adults, and many carried with them memories of peace, creativity, and laughter rather than the chaos governments promised. Music festivals, art scenes, and underground movements quietly reclaimed the plant as part of a broader search for authenticity in a synthetic world. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, Europe was softening. In the Netherlands, small coffee shops began openly selling cannabis under a policy of tolerance. Amsterdam became a haven for travelers, artists, and thinkers, a city where the smoke of freedom rose without fear. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The world watched curiously, expecting chaos, but found calm instead. And as the millennium approached, cracks began to form in the wall of prohibition. In 1996, California became the first U.S. state to legalize medical marijuana, citing compassion for patients suffering from cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. For the first time in decades, the plant was officially medicine again. Doctors who had whispered their support now spoke openly. Patients who had suffered in silence found relief without shame. The movement spread slowly, carried not by corporations or politicians, but by ordinary people, mothers, veterans, and healers who simply wanted kindness codified into law. The old narratives of fear began to unravel. Scientists rediscovered ancient uses of cannabis recorded in Chinese and Indian texts, finding that modern research often confirmed what history already knew. The plant was anti-inflammatory, analgesic, anxiolytic. It didn't rot minds, it soothed them. And as new generations grew up with access to information rather than propaganda, the myth of reefer madness dissolved into the absurdity it always was. But not everywhere was ready to listen. In many countries, punishment still reigned heavy, prisons filled with non-violent offenders, their lives consumed by systems that refused to evolve. To them, the story of cannabis was not peace, it was injustice. Yet even in those dark places, hope flickered. Underground growers developed new strains, new methods, treating cultivation as art and science combined. The plant adapted once more, evolving into countless forms, some strong, some mild, all resilient. It was a quiet rebellion, a green thread weaving through the gray fabric of conformity. By the end of the 1990s, cannabis had become both a symbol and a question. It represented rebellion, but also healing, pleasure, but also principle. It had survived emperors, empires, and entire eras of ignorance. And it was now standing on the threshold of a new one, the digital age where information flowed faster than fear. People began sharing knowledge across borders, comparing research, telling stories. The internet, that great modern oracle, gave voice to the silenced. And in that collective voice, a truth echoed from every age that humanity's relationship with cannabis was never about intoxication alone. It was about curiosity, connection, and the eternal human need to find calm in a restless world. The century had tested the plant in every possible way, green and defiant. Like an ancient memory, it waited for humanity to remember that peace does not always come from power, but sometimes from something as small and simple as a leaf held between two fingers, glowing softly in the last light of day. As the calendar turned and the world entered the 21st century, the story of cannabis reached a strange kind of awakening, neither revolution nor return, but something in between, like an old memory rising slowly to the surface of modern life. The decades of secrecy and stigma had made the plant mysterious to many, almost mythical, but now science, culture, and compassion began to bring it back into the light. In the early 2000s, the movement that had begun quietly in California started to ripple outward across continents. Patients shared their stories, elderly women treating arthritis, soldiers easing trauma, children with epilepsy finding peace after years of suffering, and those stories cut through decades of propaganda more effectively than any speech or protest ever could. Slowly, public opinion began to shift. The image of cannabis was no longer a shadowy symbol of rebellion, but a living medicine, a natural companion for healing and reflection. Scientists around the world dove deeper into studying its compounds, uncovering over 100 cannabinoids beyond THC, each with its own unique effect. Cannabidiol, or CBD, emerged as a gentle alternative, non-intoxicating, yet profoundly therapeutic. For the first time in centuries, cannabis was not just tolerated, but understood, dissected, mapped by molecular biology and neuroscience. The very thing that had once been burned as witchcraft was now published in peer-reviewed journals. Yet, the politics of the plant remained tangled. Even as nations legalized or decriminalized it, others doubled down on punishment, fearful of appearing weak or immoral. In some countries, the same act that brought relief to a patient in California, the global divide was stark, and yet the tide of empathy continued to rise. Activists, doctors, and ordinary citizens formed a strange alliance, bound not by profit, but by purpose. They spoke of compassion, science, and justice, and their voices reached farther than ever before, amplified by the boundless network of the internet. Cannabis had found its new temple, not in ancient stone, but in digital light. Meanwhile, culture began to soften. Movies, music, and art shed the cliches of stoners and rebels, replacing them with stories of mindfulness, creativity, and healing. The plant returned to its ancient identity as a quiet teacher rather than a loud vice. Wellness communities embraced it alongside meditation and yoga. Farmers began cultivating it with reverence, speaking of soil, sunlight, and sustainability. The plant, once vilified, had become a symbol of harmony, again between nature and humanity, body and mind. Yet, capitalism, always alert to opportunity, began to wrap its tendrils around this newfound acceptance. Corporations entered the space with polished branding, luxury dispensaries, and promises of lifestyle transformation. Cannabis was reborn not just as medicine, but as market. The irony was hard to miss. What had once been the herb of the poor and the persecuted was now being sold in glass jars with gold labels. Still, beneath the glitter, the essence remained unchanged. The plant did not care who smoked it or wit, simply offered what it always had: balance. As legalizations spread from Canada to Uruguay, from parts of Europe to several US states, an entire generation grew up without the fear their parents had known. They saw cannabis as normal, even banal, a part of life's quiet rhythm. And with that normalization came introspection. People began to ask deeper questions. Why had it been banned for so long? Who had suffered because of it? What other truths might still be buried under the rubble of old fear? Museums, documentaries, and historians began revisiting the forgotten centuries of cannabis history, the healers, the cultures, It was as if humanity was finally piecing together a long, broken story that had been scattered across time. In doing so, the plant became something greater than medicine or recreation. It became memory itself, symbol of resilience, misunderstood yet enduring. For every headline about profit and policy, there were quieter stories that never made the news. A veteran sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. A grandmother laughing with her grandchildren without pain. An artist rediscovering inspiration after decades of silence. These were the miracles that never asked for recognition. And as night falls across cities, where the scent of cannabis drifts gently through open windows, one can imagine that somewhere in the deep rhythm of history, the Scythian riders, the Indian sadhis, the Egyptian priests, and the modern dreamers are all connected by the same invisible breath. 5,000 years of smoke, rising, swirling, and returning to the sky. It was never just about intoxication. It was about connection to the earth, to each other, and to the quiet within ourselves. The story was no longer hidden, and yet it wasn't finished. Like all ancient companions, cannabis would continue to evolve with us, reflecting our wisdom and our flaws alike. And perhaps, in this new century, we would finally learn what our ancestors already knew, that peace need not be found in the heavens or the afterlife, but here, in the green pulse of the earth. Patient, waiting, forgiving. As the 21st century deepened, the relationship between humanity and cannabis became even more layered, more curious, and oddly poetic, as though the plant itself were watching history unfold with the calm patience of something that had already lived through every empire before. The digital era had turned stories into signals and beliefs into data. And somewhere between the noise of the internet and the hum of machines, cannabis found a new rhythm. Once whispered about in secret, it was now discussed openly on screens around the world. Scientists streaming live conferences, farmers sharing cultivation tips, patients recording their first moments of relief after years of pain. What had once been taboo now floated freely through the airwaves, as natural and unremarkable as morning coffee. But with recognition came complication. Governments struggled to untangle the knots of old laws. Industries raced ahead, eager to build empires of their own from what was once contraband. In North America, dispensaries became as common as cafes, each one glowing softly with the scent of pine and citrus. Their shelves lined with jars, labeled like perfumes, names that hinted at mountains, dreams, and moons. For many, the new era felt liberating, yet beneath the surface there was unease. The plant that had always belonged to the people was being reshaped by profit. The same corporations that once lobbied against legalization were now its loudest investors, turning healing into business, culture into commodity. Still, the deeper truth could not be sold. Cannabis was more than a product. It was a process, an ancient dialogue between body and nature. Scientists, peeling back layers of stigma, uncovered new possibilities every year. They studied how cannabinoids interacted with mood, memory, immunity, and pain, discovering that the human brain contained receptors designed precisely to fit these molecules, as if evolution itself had invited the plant to share space with us. This revelation blurred the boundary between medicine and mystery. Perhaps our ancestors had not been primitive or indulgent, but intuitive, guided by the same wisdom modern science now measured in graphs and genes. Meanwhile, artists, writers, and thinkers reclaimed the plant not as an escape from reality, but as a gentle doorway back into it. Painters spoke of how colors deepened. Musicians said rhythm felt like breathing. Writers described clarity rather than confusion. Even mindfulness communities began to integrate cannabis into their practice, not as indulgence, but as intention breathing, listening, letting thoughts slow until the mind felt like still water. In this way, the plant's role quietly returned to what it had been thousands of years ago, a bridge between the ordinary and the sacred. Yet, in parts of the world, the story remained bitter. Millions were still imprisoned for simple possession, their lives caught in the contradiction between shifting laws and unyielding punishment. Families were separated, futures erased. The injustice weighed heavy, and as movements for racial and social equity grew louder, the call for cannabis reform became intertwined with a broader demand for fairness. Legalization, activists argued, means nothing without liberation. Their message spread globally, and slowly, nations began to listen. Countries in Africa, South America, and Asia, places where cannabis had ancient cultural roots, started to re-examine their histories, acknowledging how colonial powers had once criminalized the very traditions that sustained them. Restoring the plant meant reclaiming identity. In villages of Morocco, India, and Jamaica, elders smiled quietly. To them, nothing was new. The world was simply catching up. Amid all this, a subtler transformation unfolded, the merging of technology and botany. Scientists mapped the cannabis genome. AI systems optimized light cycles and nutrients. Satellites tracked harvests from space. The plant that had once grown wild under open skies now thrived beneath precise LED suns, its every cell measured and monitored. And yet, despite all this precision, the essence remained untouched. Those who grew it spoke of intuition, of feeling when the plant was happy or restless, of understanding its rhythm beyond science. They said cannabis taught patience, that it refused to be rushed, that every leaf was a reminder of balance. Perhaps that was why, in a world spinning faster every day, people kept returning to it. For some, it was medicine. For others, meditation. For many, simply a way to breathe again. As legalization spread to more countries, as stigma melted into curiosity, something remarkable happened. Conversation replaced fear. Instead of moral panic, there was dialogue. Instead of propaganda, research. Instead of silence, laughter. Humanity and the herb were learning to trust each other again. But the story was not finished. The more the world embraced cannabis, the more it was reminded of everything it symbolized. Freedom, yes, but also responsibility to heal the wounds of the past, to protect the small farmers, to keep greed from drowning the earth in chemicals and glass. For a plant that had lived alongside humans for thousands of years, cannabis asked for very little sunlight, soil, water, and respect. And perhaps that simplicity was its final lesson in an age that had forgotten how to slow down. When the evening lights dim and the city hums softens, the scent of the plant drifts quietly through open windows, a fragrance older than civilization, carried by wind and memory alike. It smells of soil, smoke, and the slow return of truth, the same truth our ancestors once breathed on mountaintops, deserts, and temples. That peace has always been here, growing quietly at the edge of the world, waiting for us to notice. As the story of cannabis moved toward the present day, its roots began to spread far beyond medicine, beyond ritual, and into something larger: culture itself. That vast web of human expression made of sound, color, and story. To understand how the plant became such a quiet but powerful symbol of identity, we have to step back and look at how the modern world shaped it. The 20th century had seen war and propaganda, prohibition and paranoia, but the 21st brought redefinition. Musicians, writers, filmmakers, and dreamers began to reclaim the narrative. They did not see cannabis as rebellion, but as reflection, as a mirror held up to a world that often moved too fast to breathe. From the smoky jazz clubs of the 1940s to the psychedelic light shows of the 1960s, from the reggae rhythms of Jamaica to the underground hip-hop scenes of New York and London, cannabis threaded itself through melody and message alike. It was not just the plant people loved, was what it represented: freedom of mind, creativity, curiosity, and sometimes simply the courage to exist differently. In poetry, it appeared as a muse. In art, as a haze of color. In cinema, as a symbol of defiance or discovery. But the plant's cultural presence was never uniform. In some places, it was seen as divine. In others, as dangerous. Governments sought to control its image as much as its growth. Yet, the more it was suppressed, the more it adapted like the plant itself, resilient, rooting through cracks of concrete and censorship alike. In the early 2000s, the internet revolution gave cannabis culture a new home. Forums, blogs, and social networks became sanctuaries for sharing experiences and knowledge. Digital communities replaced hidden gatherings. Coded slang evolved into open conversation. Suddenly, information about strains, effects, and safe usage was everywhere, turning secrecy into education. People learned not just how to use cannabis, but how to understand it. With awareness came responsibility, and for many, a kind of awakening. The discussion shifted from getting high to getting healed. Cannabis was now seen through the lens of wellness. CBD oils, balms, and teas became the language of calm in an anxious century. Even those who had never touched the plant found themselves surrounded by its quiet presence. In skincare, in medicine, even in pet treatments. Its once illicit scent was now bottled and sold in boutique stores. But this normalization brought questions to: could something sacred survive commercialization? Could an ancient companion of humankind remain authentic when wrapped in branding and hashtags? These questions hung heavy in the smoke of the new age. In response, some returned to the source, to nature, to simplicity. They grew small gardens, not to sell, but to reconnect. In these green corners, cannabis was not product or protest, it was prayer. A reminder that growth takes time, that healing begins in soil. Anthropologists studying this cultural evolution began to see patterns that reached far beyond the plant. Cannabis, they said, was not unique, it was part of a larger human impulse to seek connection between the physical and the spiritual, to find meaning through ritual and reflection. In this sense, it joined the company of tea, coffee, cacao, and tobacco plants that shaped civilization by shaping consciousness. Yet, among them, cannabis stood apart, for it had been both demonized and deified, both outlawed and embraced. Its story was the story of balance, pleasure and pain, chaos and calm, forgetting and remembering. The irony was that even as people debated its morality, they were unknowingly participating in the same ancient cycle of discovery, fear, acceptance, and reverence. From shamans in Siberia to scientists in California, from forgotten temples in India to glowing labs in Amsterdam, the plant had remained the same. Only humanity had changed its costume. And now, standing in the glow of global legalization, the question was no longer whether people should use cannabis, but how they should use it ethically, sustainably, with awareness of history. For what good is freedom if it forgets its roots? The future of cannabis was not in consumption but conservation. Botanists began preserving rare landrace strains, those pure genetics, untouched by human tinkering, because within them lay not just flavor but history, the living memory of climates and cultures long gone. Each seed carried a story, each leaf a lineage, and perhaps that is the most fascinating part of this boring history. It refuses to end. It grows, like the plant itself, steadily, patiently, toward the light. As the night deepens and the world quiets, imagine those first ancient humans sitting around a fire thousands of years ago, discovering what happens when they inhale the smoke of this strange green herb. They didn't know they were beginning a story that would travel through every age, cross every border, and still be told today in cities lit by neon instead of moonlight. They only knew that something in the plant made them feel closer to themselves, to each other, to the earth. And maybe that is all humanity ever wanted. So as you drift toward sleep, let that thought settle like ash after flame, that somewhere between earth and sky, between science and spirit, grows a small, stubborn plant that has followed us since the dawn of time, whispering the same message in every language piece. When the world began to realize that cannabis was not merely a drug or a relic of rebellion, but a companion species, something that had grown beside humanity for millennia, quiet shift began in how people thought about the future, not just the future of the plant, but the future of our relationship with nature itself. The history of cannabis had been written in cycles: discovery, celebration, fear, and rediscovery. And as humanity entered an age of artificial intelligence, space exploration, and climate crisis, it became clear that our oldest teacher might not be found in machines, but in the gentle green leaves that had always been here. In laboratories glowing with blue light, scientists studied cannabinoids to treat anxiety, inflammation, epilepsy, and even cancer. They spoke of endocannabinoid systems, of receptors named CB1 and CB2, of how the human body seemed designed to communicate with this plant on a molecular level. To some, that was evidence of evolutionary synchronicity. To others, poetic coincidence. But regardless of interpretation, one truth lingered. Cannabis had always met us where we were, whether in ritual, recreation, or recovery. The irony of history was that after centuries of demonization, humanity now turned to the same plant for healing what its own modern world had broken: its stress, its sleeplessness, its loneliness. In this sense, cannabis became less a substance and more a mirror, reflecting what humanity needed most: balance. Across continents, communities began to reimagine their relationship with cannabis, blending ancient wisdom with modern science. In Japan, artists created minimalist gardens where hemp and stone coexisted as symbols of harmony. In Africa, elders told stories of how the plant connected them to ancestors. In Europe, architects designed sustainable buildings using hempcrate, rediscovering its strength and simplicity. And in North America, therapists used cannabis-assisted mindfulness sessions to help trauma survivors reconnect with their bodies. What had begun as a conversation about legality had evolved into a discussion about consciousness. People were no longer asking, "Should we smoke weed?" but rather, "What can this teach us about ourselves?" That shift marked a kind of spiritual maturity, the quiet recognition that wisdom is not about control, but cooperation. Yet, even in this awakening, the contradictions remained. Nations profited, while farmers struggled. Pharmaceutical interests patented compounds nature had freely given. It was as if humanity could not help but repeat the same pattern, taking what was wild and trying to own it. Still, the plant resisted full domestication. No matter how sterile the laboratory, no matter how controlled the greenhouse, cannabis seemed to carry with it a wildness, a whisper of wind through leaves, a reminder that life does not belong to us. Some growers claimed that music made plants grow better. Some believed the moon's phases affected potency. Science often dismissed these ideas as superstition, yet the growers smiled. They weren't chasing data, they were listening. And maybe that listening was what humanity had forgotten. Cannabis, in its quiet way, retaught it. As legalization spread, so did creativity. Poets wrote about awareness. Chefs crafted meals infused with calm. Filmmakers made documentaries exploring how the plant had shaped revolutions and religions alike. And in sleepy corners of the world, where night still felt sacred, people used cannabis the same way their ancestors had, not to escape, but to arrive, to sit still in their own being. The irony, perhaps, was that the boring history of this plant was never boring at all. It was the history of humanity, learning, forgetting, and remembering the same lesson over and over, that peace cannot be forced. It must be grown. And like the plant, it takes patience. To sit with that thought in the stillness of evening is to feel the echo of every age before us, the farmers of China who wove hemp rope, the shamans of Siberia who burned herbs in ritual, the philosophers of Greece who spoke of moderation, the poets of the Middle East who found metaphors in its smoke, the activists of the 1960s who demanded freedom. Each generation, in its own way, touched the same truth. The plant was never about escape, it was about return. As night stretches long and the air cools, imagine yourself in a field where cannabis grows tall. the leaves rustling softly in rhythm with your heartbeat. There is no noise here, no rush, only breath. The plant exhales oxygen. You exhale worry. The exchange is ancient, endless. Maybe this is what the first people felt when they found it, that wordless connection between body and earth, between inhale and exhale, between knowing and simply being. The story of cannabis is, after all, the story of life's quiet persistence, the green that pushes through stone, the peace that survives the storm. And though humanity has changed beyond recognition since that first spark of fire, the plant remains the same, patient as always, waiting for us to remember that sometimes the simplest things, the breath, the leaf, the light, are the ones that carry eternity. By the time the modern world found itself surrounded by glowing screens and humming machines, humanity's relationship with cannabis had become something far greater than history. It had become reflection. To look at the plant now was to see a mirror of civilization itself, how it grows, how it changes, how it adapts. Once hunted, now harvested. Once cursed, now celebrated. It was as though the plant had endured humanity's entire emotional spectrum, from fear to fascination, and still stood quietly, green and forgiving. In the 2020s, cannabis moved from the margins of society into the mainstream, a transformation both thrilling and strange. Governments that had once declared war on it now collected taxes from it. Doctors who had once called it dangerous now prescribed it for pain, anxiety, and insomnia. The same newspapers that printed scare headlines a century ago now ran stories about wellness and self-care. It was a peculiar redemption, less a victory than a quiet acknowledgement that the plant had always known something humanity was only beginning to remember. Still, the story was not all light. In the rush to commercialize, to turn leaves into logos, the sacred became spectacle. Ancient rituals were rebranded as luxury retreats. Small growers were replaced by corporations. The language of community was replaced by the language of profit. It was here that the oldest lesson of cannabis returned. Growth without balance leads to decay. But even within the glittering machinery of modern capitalism, a countercurrent stirred. Across the world, people began rediscovering slow-living farmers' markets, herbal medicines, and mindfulness. Cannabis became a symbol, not just of calm, but of care. A reminder that everything taken from the earth carries responsibility. The new generation of cultivators approached, growing like art, listening to the soil, learning from the sun, treating each plant not as a product, but as a living being. They spoke of the spirit of the crop, of how some plants seemed to hum, others to rest, and how the energy of the grower seemed to affect the harvest. Science had no explanation for this, but perhaps it didn't need one. There are truths that data cannot measure, truths you can only feel when standing in a silent field under the wide, breathing sky. As years passed, the conversation around cannabis evolved from legality to legacy. Nations debated how to repair the damage of the war on drugs, how to free those imprisoned for actions now deemed harmless, how to ensure equity for the communities most harmed. Activists called for restorative justice, for inclusion, for remembrance. Legalization without liberation, they said, is just another kind of control. And so, the movement grew, not one of smoke and rebellion, but of compassion and memory. It was not about celebrating intoxication, but about honoring survival, the endurance of a culture, a plant, a people. Meanwhile, on the scientific frontier, cannabis research entered uncharted territory. Neuroscientists found new receptors. Chemists discovered hundreds of cannabinoids, each with subtle effects on mood, pain, and perception. The plant, once dismissed as simple, revealed itself to be astonishingly complex. Some researchers even theorized that cannabis played a role in human evolution, perhaps influencing creativity, language, or spirituality. Though such ideas remain speculative, they fit the poetic truth of the plant. It has always inspired imagination. And as technology advanced, cannabis entered the digital realm. Systems designing perfect grow environments. Virtual reality experiences teaching the history of hemp. Genetic editing mapping new medicinal strains. The ancient herb had followed humanity into the future, and yet it somehow remained the same. A small green reminder that wisdom does not require Wi-Fi. In homes, it sat quietly in jars. In gardens, it swayed. In rituals, it burned softly, carrying prayers upward. And for those who used it mindfully, it still offered what it always had, a moment of presence. For all the debates about health, law, and economy, perhaps the simplest truth was the one most overlooked. Cannabis slows time just enough for us to feel alive again. It asks nothing extraordinary, just that we breathe, listen, and exist. As the planet faces its uncertain future, melting ice, rising seas, fractured politics, the plant remains an emblem of endurance, of how something small and fragile can survive through ages of fire and fear. Maybe that is why, even now, under artificial stars of city light, people still gather in quiet circles, sharing stories and smoke, watching the world exhale. In those moments, borders fade, years dissolve, and humanity returns, however briefly, to what it has always been, a single tribe beneath the same sky, seeking peace in the simplest of things. The story of cannabis may appear boring, but perhaps that's only because it tells the same truth every civilization forgets, that life, in its calmest state, is enough. And so, as the story of cannabis reaches this quiet final chapter, we find ourselves looking not backward, but inward, at what this ancient green teacher has shown us about who we are and how we live. Every civilization that touched the plant left a piece of itself within its Egyptian healers who wove its fibers into cloth, Indian mystics who mixed it into bhang for meditation, Chinese physicians who prescribed it for pain, African elders who burned it in ritual smoke to speak with ancestors. Each culture used it differently, yet the intention was the same: connection to the body, to the spirit, to the earth. Now, in the 21st century, that connection feels both distant and close, blurred by modern noise, yet still pulsing beneath the surface of human life. Cannabis, once the quiet companion of farmers and shamans, has become the focus of scientists and investors, a curious twist of fate that mirrors humanity's restless hunger to label, categorize, and own everything it touches. But perhaps, in its patient resilience, the plant is teaching something subtler, that not everything sacred can be sold, not everything ancient can be improved. If history has a heartbeat, it beats softly in green. When people inhale cannabis today, they are breathing the same molecules that moved through the lungs of shepherds thousands of years ago, the same smoke that curled toward the stars above forgotten fires. The continuity is almost divine, a thread woven through time that ties the modern dreamer to the first human who looked at a plant and wondered what it might mean. The irony of calling this boring history is that it's anything but. It's a story of endurance, of misunderstanding, of rediscovery, looping endlessly through ages of ignorance and insight. In every era, cannabis has adapted to the beliefs of the time, a medicine in one century, a menace in another, a movement in this one. Yet, through all its transformations, its essence remains the same, calm, grounding, quietly revolutionary. Its history, if you listen closely, is a conversation between chaos and stillness. Humanity has always oscillated between these two, building, destroying, conquering, forgetting while the plant simply grows, unaffected by ideology or ego. It offers peace without preaching, truth without doctrine. And perhaps that's what frightens power most, something that cannot be owned, only experienced. In a world obsessed with speed, cannabis insists on slowness. In an age addicted to certainty, it invites wonder. It does not demand faith, only awareness. Sit with it long enough, and you begin to understand why ancient mystics used it not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. It dissolves the illusion of separation, the lie that humans stand apart from nature. Every breath, every heartbeat, every green leaf says otherwise. The modern person, rushing through life beneath electric skies, might find this plant to be a kind of anchor. A gentle reminder that peace isn't a destination, but a rhythm, the slow inhale, the slower exhale. And when you think of all the civilizations that have come and gone, of all the wars fought, laws written, and fires lit over this one small plant, you realize something profound. Cannabis has witnessed it all. It outlived empires, outlasted kings, survived prohibition and propaganda. It has seen humanity at its most violent and its most creative, and through it all, it remained exactly what it has always been, a plant growing quietly in sunlight. Maybe that's the final lesson of this long, sleepy history, that truth doesn't shout, it whispers. You just have to be still enough to hear it. So, as you listen now, perhaps drifting between wakefulness and dream, imagine that green field stretching endlessly beneath a starlit sky, the air soft and warm, the world finally silent. You can almost hear the sound of leaves brushing against one another, the faint hum of life continuing as it always has. The scent of the plant carries memories older than language, stories of creation, of curiosity, of compassion. Somewhere out there, in that vast, timeless space between then and now, humanity and nature meet again, not as master and subject, not as consumer and product, but as companions. It's a small, sacred moment, easily missed, endlessly repeating. And in that silence, if you listen carefully, you might feel what all those who came before us felt, that strange, soothing truth that everything we seek has always been here. The world breathes, the plant breathes, and for a fleeting moment, so do we all, part of the same endless rhythm that has no beginning and no end, only calm.